IndieWeen continues, friends and fiends. We're on a mission to find 5 indie horror games whose combined prices total less than a single AAA title. Be sure to check out the last 3 videos before this one when you're done to see how far along we are on getting the most boo for our buck. Today we're going to cover a recent staple of the indie horror community, Little Nightmares. Little Nightmares is made by one Tarsier Studios, which I hope I said that right. Founded in Sweden back in 2004. Tarsier initially did a lot of work making DLCs for the PlayStation exclusive Little Big Planet, and then working directly under Sumo to make Little Big Planet 3. But in 2017, they finally got a chance to shine on their own, with Bandai Namco publishing their standalone debut, Little Nightmares. Little Nightmares is a puzzle platformer centered around the nightmares we might have had as children, and you follow a child named Six who's just trying to get out of a place called the Maw, which by the standard of everything we see in the Maw seems to be a pretty good idea. Six also gets pretty hungry sometimes. So yeah, those Little Big Planet roots really shown Little Nightmares' core gameplay loop. Come to think of it, even the names do sound a bit similar. Little Nightmares plays as a 3D side-scrolling platformer where you're going to do a lot of jumping, ledge grabbing, and climbing to get from one room to the next. A lot of the puzzles you're going to do will center around grabbing something, moving it, and figuring out how to get out of the room you're in and hopefully elude whatever is in there with you. Your mileage may vary on the latter. But when you're not doing platforming and dragging puzzles, you'll be hiding. You play as a small, sickly child who doesn't stand a chance against all the things inside of the Maw. You don't even have the option to fight against them, as you are so hopelessly outclassed and outsized by everyone and everything in the Maw that the second they get to you, it's all over. Most of the time, they can and will outrun you too, so running away isn't much of an option either. Stealth is fairly tricky to do, as it's not as straightforward hide in the shadows until the bad thing goes away type deal. Most enemies will always be hanging out in whatever room you're in. To make matters even better, the first major enemy you encounter, the janitor, is completely blind, but he's got a very good sense of hearing and smelling. I think he's sniffing for you. That means the shadows are effectively useless against him, and if you get too close, he'll instantly know that you're there regardless of if you're in where his line of sight would be or not. It doesn't help that he's got really, really long arms and that he'll be able to grab you no matter where you're hiding as long as he's got a bead on you. Getting past enemies requires a lot of patience and care, as Six is most certainly not Corvo Atano, and is lucky if she's even able to remove a board nailed to a door frame. Now, it wouldn't be a puzzle platformer if there wasn't a bad case of "you need to think like the devs do" syndrome inundating a lot of the puzzles and sequences in this game. You'll frequently, or at least I personally frequently, found myself stuck on certain rooms for quite a while, especially earlier in the game. A good example of this is that early in the game you establish that Six is capable of climbing cages in the Maw, and she's also able to jump a decent distance as long as she's got a running start. You're taken to an area where you need to climb up to the top of a large vertical room to progress, and that room is filled with those cages. And once you get up to a certain point, you'll need to jump onto a suspended platform that looks as if it'll put you just in jumping range of a large stack of cages on the back wall, which have a pattern of exposed bars that look like they'd lead right up to the top of the room. I was stuck there for a solid 15 minutes, trying, failing, dying of fall damage, and then trying again to jump onto the cages on that far wall to no avail. Later on, I felt vindicated in doing this, as a theme I noticed later on in a lot of the jumps is that they require you to jump from a very specific point in order to get across the gap, and it is very easy to whiff a jump, especially during certain chase sequences. What was the solution in the end? Well, it turned out I was supposed to climb up the chain that would take me up to the next area and allow me to throw a switch that would bring the platform up with me. Naturally, I felt like a complete moron for wasting 15 minutes trying to make a jump I wasn't supposed to make, but in my defense, it wasn't established up until that point that the chains were climbable like cages were. There were a couple more moments like this early in the game where I tried doing something based on established mechanics or just what made sense to me based on my own undervolted brain, but eventually I sort of got with the program and started thinking like the devs, and the later half of the game was actually quite decent. Like, not like insultingly easy, but once you figure out how the devs want you to think, you're gonna have a good time. Let's get into them spookies now. In Little Nightmares, as previously mentioned, you are little. Everything save for those gnomes are bigger than you. Monsters dwarf you. Things like beds, doors, and even cabinets are things that you'll need to find some way of jury-rigging around, as you are much too small to either move them or get past them on your own. And even so, the levers are so big compared to you that you can't operate them. You can't even reach most buttons by yourself and have to throw something at them and hope it works. The only thing that seems to fit you are the ventilation shafts, and those are not exactly a place you want to be. It creates this foreboding atmosphere even when you're in areas where you're not immediately being stalked by something, and it makes everything feel extra bleak. Like essentially you've got no way of getting out of this place, as you could barely get to the next room. You could barely find enough food not to starve to death, let alone survive in this maw. Then there's the darkness. It's even more foreboding than the normal stuff in the maw, and it's very well used. You'll often not be completely blind inside of dark areas, but you'll be able to just make out the silhouettes of objects and the monsters that are hunting you. Six does have a little bitty lighter that she can use to give herself a bit of vision in these areas, and you can light up some lanterns for some extra vision in certain spots. But when you're in the darkness, it's all consuming and makes the already spooky environments all the worse for you now that your vision is limited, and the thing that's in the room with you doesn't have much concern for how well lit the room is. The darkness has much more of an inky feel than just like pitch black, and it adds a lot to the game. It gives it that sort of extra panache to the moments where you're scrambling around in the darkness, hoping that whatever else is in there with you doesn't see you as a snack. Lastly, we've got the monster design, which is in no way relying on the previously mentioned darkness to give you a spook. When you do see the monsters in full light, they'll be real freaky looking. It's not so much of like a body horror or gore fest like we've been seeing in a lot of horror lately, but more along the lines of exaggerated features, the scope of their size when compared to you, and the uncanny valley nature of how all of them look. Like, it's not body horror, but it's like that sort of, like, it's off. We've talked about the janitor a fair bit for this video, but let's talk more about the next batch of enemies you fight, the chefs, for a second. While their big, wrinkly bodies and sausage-like appendages might already be bad enough, when we look closely at them, we might notice that they're scratching under their necks and chins, as if this already pretty disturbing face is actually some sort of mask. What could be so creepy looking that the chefs wear that face as a mask? I'm a big fan of this, as this is not only the standard let the viewer fill in the blanks on their own trick, but it's also spooky looking from the outset before we even start using our imaginations. And while we're on the subject of monsters and how good they all look, let me take a second to say that everything in this game looks really, really good. Little Nightmares runs in UE4, and all the assets look great. They're not only stylized, but contribute to an aesthetic, and that the devs were able to fully realize over at Tarsier, and everything looks nice individually on like a item level, and the whole area still, everything looks great in this game. This is certainly a scary game, but it's also one of the best looking horror games I've covered like on the channel. Hey, you know what we haven't done in a while? An anti-sponsorship. For those of you that have recently joined us, the anti-sponsor is a section where I dig through my email inbox for not just the scummy, but the especially egregious integration deals I'm offered and lampoon them for your amusement before I shamelessly shill for my Patreon. It's been a minute, so we're gonna do a double whammy and cover 2 offers I got to either use or shill for services that try to abuse the parasocial relationship between internet guys like me and viewers like you. The first of these 2 was a service wanting me to use their service for, where I quote from the email, creators on the platform making money while connecting with their followers in a deeper way. AKA make a paid group chat where poor sods would pay a monthly fee I'd set a la only friends, and then they'd most likely take a little bit off the top to sustain their business. They're going especially hard at ripping off the only friends model, as towards the end of the email it also said, pro tip, start a free redacted for everyone and a paid redacted for your closest followers, friends, and fans. Yeah, no. You can come talk to me on the Discord for free. Just be nice and follow the rules and we're all good. There is the secret patron channel, but that's just where I occasionally post bonus cat pics. Whatever. Then if that wasn't egregious enough for you, I've got an even better one for you. Another one of these types slithered into my inbox a few months ago and proposed that I use their service to leverage my social media presence to do a paid by the minute party chat, consultation line, through their service. How about the biggest, fattest no I can offer? And then it took me all my willpower when they asked for my phone number to do a sort of consultation. It's just not to tell them it's 1-800-GET-FUCKED, which part of the reason why I didn't is possibly because somebody else uses that number except with different letterings, and I don't want to accidentally send them to some innocent group of people. They listed a few testimonial channels that use their service already, and after looking into them for a bit, my immediate impressions of them were that they seem to be exactly the kind of people who try to make a buck off their fans like that. I choose to make a buck off my fans in a much more acceptable way by running patreon.com/charlatanwonder, where for your pledge you can get early access to videos, uncut versions of commentary videos, vote in polls to decide future videos, and so much more. If you can't or won't, that's totally cool. I'll still be making these videos as best I can for as long as I can. Now let's get back to Little Nightmares. So as far as story and characterization go in Little Nightmares, there isn't too much to go off here, as there is effectively no dialogue in the entirety of the game. The most we get out of characters are their actions and how they react to certain things when prompted. As for our main character, Six, we don't see too much of this early on, but there are a few moments that solidify each character. Six wants to get out and is very hungry. She doesn't care what she snacks on as long as she is sated. The janitor and the cooks seem to want to go about their business, and part of their business is making sure that you are caught and consumed. The gluttons want to eat literally everything, and so on. There's, like I said, not too much to go off here. At first I thought this was going to be some sort of allegorical thing going on. It seemed like the beginning of the mom might have been some sort of distorted view of a child losing a parent and then being sent to a very prison-like foster care system. But after I got out of the prison and into the lair, it seems like it was more a collection of nightmares mashed up into one scenario, which I now realize is literally what the blurb on the Steam store page is. Maybe I was right in the beginning and there is some sort of ongoing overarching theme, but I'm too small-brained to put it all together. Okay, let's get into the minimal story spoilers that we have to go off here. You know what to do if you don't want these. Six is captured by an entity that's more explained in the comics, as that's the vogue thing to do with your horror titles lore when you have no idea if you're getting a sequel or not, and then it's found in the Maw, a gigantic structure dedicated to a strange symbiotic relationship between hordes of gluttons who come aboard it and the lady who is seemingly in charge of it. We aren't explicitly told what happens to the children like Six, but there are quite a few death scenes where the chef just chucks you into a pot. Six breaks out of her confinement, as many children before her have done, to varying levels of success, but she makes it all the way out of the prison, past the kitchens, and into the guest area where the gluttons feast. Along the way, she has to satisfy her own hunger, which is relatively normal at first and even understandable when she gets desperate, but eventually it's shown that Six has no regard for other life when it comes to satisfying her cravings. Six eventually gets into the lady's quarters and even finds a way to incapacitate the lady for long enough to consume her, which upon doing so she gains her powers, and I'm pretty sure at this point that Six probably isn't exactly human. The end. For Six's story anyway. There's another child we follow in the DLCs, but things don't go well for him, and we figure out what the gnomes are. Speaking of those DLCs, there's 3 of them. In total, they all run about as long as the main game, bringing up the total playtime to a little over 7 hours for me between both the main story and the DLCs. The DLCs run somewhat parallel to the main story, where we follow another child who's trapped in the Maw as he attempts his own escape. Let's talk about the first one. The Depths. The Depths has you starting off pretty near where Six started off, except that this child keeps on ending up in flooded areas and for some reason must deal with a very soggy dude trying to snatch him. Gotta be honest here, once you get into it, the water puzzles are fairly similar all the way up until the end, and it feels like this DLC is saying, hey, you know how everyone loves water puzzles in games? Their slowed, imprecise movement, and many deaths? Well, what if we made an entire DLC that's nothing but that? It also doesn't help that most of these puzzles feel very similar to the shoe rooms that we went through in the base game, save for now we have to futz around with pumps and stuff to do certain parts. Then we've got the Hideaway. The Hideaway adds genuinely new mechanics to the mix by expanding on something that you could do in the base game. If you catch them, the gnomes will follow you around, and after you give them a little hug, they'll pretty much do whatever you need. And in the Hideaway, you can get them to do things for you a la Pikmin. This would be pretty cool if not for how the gnome AI is absolutely infuriating at times, and I had to reset on a couple occasions since a gnome just didn't want to move out of a certain spot, and therefore I could not complete a puzzle. It also doesn't help that the throwing of the gnomes is a very particular thing you need to do, where you need to be in an exact spot and throw it in a certain way, and it can take a few tries to get the little suckers to do what you need them to do. It also has this one moment where it felt like the hell version of chasing rabbits in Super Mario, except where in Mario you have all sorts of tricks and stuff you can do to outmaneuver the slightly faster than you rabbit. Here, you're trapped in a coal pit where not only do you move slower and not have any sort of maneuver tricks, but the gnome moves at its same, slightly faster than your base speed. And I gotta be honest, I did not enjoy my time with this one at all. Finally, there's the Residents, the final DLC where we learn the fate of our protagonist. This one is a different format than all the other DLCs in the base game, where rather than a linear progression, you're in one major hub area for most of it where you can accomplish tasks in a somewhat free-form order. I was pretty down with this until we got to the latter half of the DLC. Once you get your first two little statues you need to open up the way out, the lady disappears and suddenly these little shadow children start pursuing you and you have to use your flashlight to take them out Alan Wake style. Problem is, it's clear that this game's movement wasn't built for this and it's infuriatingly hard to dispatch these little twerps, which, by the way, keep respawning at certain points, or at least it felt like that. I tried this whole thing with both a keyboard and mouse as well as a controller setup, and at least for me, it was essentially impossible to do with a keyboard and mouse since you use the arrow keys to look and move the flashlight, versus a controller where you've got a thumbstick that lets you point in specific directions. Also, I can't help but notice after scripting this that all the DLCs got progressively worse in each one, and I keep using the word infuriating, which I have to say is a pretty apt word for a lot of these puzzles, and it's a shame because I really liked this one up until we got to the shadow things. I thought the second DLC was just a dip in quality thanks to experimenting with new mechanics, but here we are with DLCs that got progressively worse each release. I wish I could say something nicer, but that's just how I felt. So overall, I'd say that while the base price of $19.99 makes Little Nightmares the priciest game we've covered so far, it's worth it for the stellar aesthetics, and there's a good bit of replay value in finding all the collectibles, and even a speed challenge once you've got the game down. I wouldn't be surprised if in some respects Tarsier wanted Little Nightmares to end up being a speed game, as I can see with how all these precise jumps and movements, how this game could be optimized well below the 55 minutes that they asked for in the achievement. And yeah, it looks like Little Nightmares has a fairly active speed community that's got 5 different categories. And as I write this, the any percent record was just topped early last month, and the any percent glitchless was topped at the end of September. So yeah, people are active here. It's nice to see a game that, based on the times across all categories, is pretty well optimized, but it still has people going at it to see just how much faster they can make the game. Now, before we get to the total, of course I know that there's a Little Nightmares 2 that came out earlier in this year, but right now we're only talking about the first game since we're trying to game on a budget. That being said, I'm only recommending the base game, as while the DLCs do double your playtime, I personally found them to be much less enjoyable than the base game, and if we can save $10, let's save $10. Maybe buy the DLCs when they're on sale in the Secrets of the Maw expansion pass, but only if you played the base game and the sequel and really just want more of what you got there. So let's go over our running total real quick. As some of you might have seen recently, the developer of World of Horror is back in action, so now we are having that be a definitely buy. So with that being a definitely buy at $14.99 plus $9.99 for Spooky Jump Scare Mansion HD renovation, then plus nothing at all for any of the zombie games that we covered in the source mod sampler, and now a $19.99 for Little Nightmares, which does make it the most expensive game so far in IndieWeen, but I think it's well worth it for just how good looking everything is in general, and you do get a lot of fun platforming stuff out of it. We're at a grand total of $44.97, and arguably you could have spent as little as, say, $34.98 on this, say if you just wanted the free version of Spooky's Jump Scare Mansion. So that's gonna do it for today. Be sure to stick around for the finale of IndieWeen next week, where we'll get lost in the creation of someone whose work we've already covered this IndieWeen, and for all the cool stuff once the spooky season is over. If you really like what I'm doing here, be sure to mosey on over to patreon.com/charlatanwonder and see if any of the tiers strike your fancy. If you can't or won't, that's cool, but be sure to at least come by the Discord and say hi. In the meantime, please stay safe, wear something reflective and easily visible from a distance if you're going to go out at night, wash your hands and wear a mask in indoor public spaces, and enjoy this cat video. You! Why you loafing in the kitchen? You ain't a loaf of bread. You a loaf of sauce. But seriously, cat. We keep seeing you doing this. You just decide to be a loaf in the middle of the kitchen. Like, look, let me back up here. Right in the middle of the kitchen. Our boy just feels the need to chill. Why do you do it? Why are you agitated? I see that waggly tail. I'm coming in for a pet. Oh, what is this? You got a smell? Don't smell that. That's garbage. You're an odd one, Frisk.